well today I'm going to do something slightly different. We're going to do 3 studies and I'm going to talk to you about designing and how maybe you can adapt a photograph or a plant, a drawing, and make it into a design of some sort. Very often in working as an illustrator, you do come across commissions or opportunities where you need to adapt a plant or make a plant into some kind of attractive design for, I don't know, menus or greetings cards or whatever. So whatever the brief is, it's quite nice to know that you can, there are ways of adapting a plant without changing the nature of it, but to create something more attractive and more suitable for a commercial purpose. So as I've worked many years as an illustrator, every now and then you get asked to do something which is a little slightly out of your comfort zone. And so I'm trying to equip you with some of those little techniques that I use in those circumstances. We're choosing today because I absolutely adore them, and that's the juvenile fern. I took lots of photographs last spring in preparation for doing something like this, and I just absolutely adore them. They come out of the ground sort of mid-spring, and the very young ones just have these beautiful sculptural forms. And so this bracken, this is common bracken, which is a fern of sorts, and it's all over the place around where I live, and so seeing them pop up, you know, early on in the year is just delightful, because you know that summer is just around the corner. So what I've done this time, because I want to do 3 studies with you of different techniques, is I've already painted part of the plant. So we're going to do continue the painting of the head of the bracken, and just go through some of the little techniques that I use for painting something like this. And then we will, because I've already got half of it done, we'll then move on to a pen and ink, which I've already started a little bit of, and then talk to you how I've adjusted it for that design, and then move on to a further design where we'll use pencil and a wash. So let's do the painting first. What I'm going to do is I'm going to mix up some lovely greens, and there's some lovely minty green in here, there's some fresh green and some very dark green. So I'm going to mix the dark green first. French ultramarine. And we'll add to that a good wallop of Sennelier Yellow Deep. Get a really nice, good, deep mix. Now I'm going to add to that a little bit of Phthalocyanine Blue, just to brighten it a little bit. Just add it in small amounts. Then take some of that over here, and we'll add, just clean my brush so I don't make a mess. We'll add lots of lemon. So we get a nice bright mix there, and I'm just going to add a tiny bit more phthalocyanine to that mix, just to make it a bit brighter. And then we'll do the minty green. We'll take a little bit of phthalocyanine over here, take some of our main colour, and then stir what's left into the main colour. So we've got our lovely 3 greens, and we're going to need some red as well for the little hairs, which is what gives it that lovely sort of rusty look to it. So I'm going to mix together some Helios purple. Let's get it woken up a little bit. And some Sennelier yellow. Oh, too much yellow. I worked the yellow up too much. And to that I'm going to add just a little bit of French ultramarine, not too much, just to knock it down. A bit more yellow, a bit more blue, a bit more pink. There we go. So we're looking for that lovely bright orangey rust colour. Lovely, good. So now I'm going to use a number 2 brush and a fine liner. So let's just get my fine liner out. What I do is I work out roughly from my photograph the little sections and work out the midribs, and then I give it a little bit of colour. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put a little wash over this whole little branch. And these are all the tiny side leaves that are all curled up. It's so pretty, I love it. I did a painting of these years ago, all in a row, and they look so lovely. So a little glaze just to get some water on there and just to break the size on the paper. And then I'm going to pick up my bright green and just drop that along those top leaves there. And then go to my minty green and drop my minty green along the bottom. It's quite a light wash, so you can see the pencil through it when it dries, so don't worry if you feel like you're painting over your drawing and you won't see it. I'm just going to drop in some minty colour there for that shadowy area, and then into the main stem. The main stem is going to be my slightly warmer green, the darker green. So clean your brush, pick up the colour, give it a little stir when you pick it up. Just going to run some of that through the middle. Then with a clean damp brush, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to fill in any little gaps. Wipe a little bit of light along the top of the stem. That just helps us find it while we're painting in detail. And then I'm going to very lightly lift a little bit of colour out of each tiny leaf, just to give it a little bit of light on the top. Don't take too much out because it will actually fade quite quickly, so you just want a little bit, just so you've defined each little bump. You can work quite quickly just with using the tip of the brush and just tapping it out. And then we'll leave that to dry. So that's our first stage. Now we want to let that dry. So we're going to do the same thing to this area down here. So each little leaf will get its own little wash of colour. But because these are slightly more open, we'll do the stem first and then come back and do one little leaf at a time. So let's get the little curl, because that's sort of separated. We can do that first. Just love the way this makes a little heart shape here. It's so adorable. I think that's the lovely thing about botanical painting, is when you find a plant that you really enjoy, it's just fascinating sort of looking into all of the shapes and the colours, trying to identify what it is that you like about it. Just love a twisted curly thing. I don't know what that says about me. Just going to put a small amount of the mid green, just watered down there, just to sort of knock it in, as they used to say. I'm going to put some water down the back here, just to give me an even run, because sometimes when you're doing small things, the paint can resist from the paper, and then you find yourself getting shabby edges. So I'm using the bright green here for the back. Just take it to there first. So I'm going to bring the stem colour in around the leaves to begin with. Tap it round. And then I'm going to use my damp brush just to lift out a little bit of light along the top. And then while that's settling and drying, I'm going to continue with some water and then just knock in the, or map in the lower stem, going down to a sort of minty green down here. Off we go. So when you get down to the bottom here, just sweep the colour forward and sit it alongside a crease or something like that. If you obviously haven't painted this bit before, so just soften it down, and that way when you do the next bit you can just soften them into one another. And all I'm going to do is just lift a little bit of light through there and a little bit of light down the middle here, just to give it a bit more of a cylindrical feel, but also they're sort of like little creases and veins down the stem, so it's quite nice to sort of indicate that slightly. And again, just soften that away. Right, so once we've got the stem in, we can now come back and look at each little leaf on its own. So I'm going to put a little glaze here, and I'm going to use the darker green and just tap that in where it turns under, so it's a little bit darker here. And then the fresher green on top. So for the moment they're just going to be areas rather than any detail, from light to dark. And then you can just let them settle for a moment and then just hoover out with a damp brush some little highlights. And then when it looks sort of more or less the right form, then leave that one alone and then jump to the next but one. That just gives that one a chance to dry. So you do a little glaze of water. It doesn't have to be a lot of water because there's such tiny areas. And then continue to map in your darks and the main colour that you see. So if you see it as a sort of mid-green, then use the mid-green colour. But water it down a little bit so that you have a difference from the darker area to the lighter area. And just tap it on really lightly like that, making sure you get rid of the white. We don't need the white. I'm just going to put a little bit of fresher green in the middle of that area there. And then when you're happy that you've got a little bit of light form and colour on there, move to the next one, and we'll just run our way down. And as you get further down the stem, you'll get these little escaped leaves. So these ones, you need to put a little bit more form into them, but just take it really slowly and just map them in one at a time. So once you've got everything mapped in, what you need to do now is just be really methodical and work through, and I'm going to work from right to left. Oh, sorry, no, left to right. Don't put me in charge of directions. And I'm going to just mix up my dark green. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little bit of a shadow through here just to define where this, where the middle band goes and where each individual little leaf goes. So basically I'm putting a little bit of shadow just there. I'm going to pull that up, and when we meet a leaf we're going to just pull a little bit of shadow in and around it. What I want to do is I want to go to about there, quickly clean my brush, and then soften the top of each little area so that the shadow just softens in and around them. And you work all the way up, putting the little shadow just above them there. And then when we come back, we'll use some of our rust colour, and we'll do the same at the top here. Just a little bit of a rusty background. And then catch underneath it. So we identify this lovely branch as it curls through and give it a little bit of three dimension, that's the word I'm looking for. And if we take some of that bright green, once that little shadow is dry, you can run some bright green along the bottom edge of the main stem and then soften it in. So you get a nice three-dimensional feel of that curling around. So we'll do that all the way under there, and then we'll add some little shadow underneath here and there, just to give this branch a little bit more form. So just use the dark green to start with, and then if you see it a bit brighter, swap to the bright green. So once we've defined the shadow underneath the stem, you can see that's starting to give us a little bit more form. Now what I want to do is I want to work on these larger leaves as they curl around here and sort of give them a little bit more definition. So I'm going to mix up a little bit more of my bright green, and I'm going to use that to identify the midrib. Very subtle because they're all hairy and then they're very tiny as well. So you just need a little bit on the tiptoe of your brush. And I'm just going to run a tiny little bit of definition for each little midrib. It also helps you find your way through the around the plant, as it were. So you're identifying the shapes and understanding them as well. So just take a small amount on the tiptoe of your brush and follow it round so you can see roughly where the midrib starts. And they're a little bit wobbly because you're getting the side leaflets sort of creating a bit more of a texture to the edge of the midrib. Just going to run that up there. That's curling away around there. It also can give you your disappearing edge, which is what we're looking for. And just making them a little bit darker where they curl under. That gives me direction and shape. Now I'm going to come back and wake up my dark green, and I'm going to use my dark green to paint in the negative shapes in between all the little side leaves. So where they kick out, I'll paint in the gap in between. Now if there isn't a gap, what you can do is just define how they're curling under. So I'm just going to give a slight darkness underneath, just to define the fact that they're curling under and they're creating a little shadow. And you can see the leaves on the other side are just little dark spaces in between. So I'm just putting a little bit of definition in there to show there's another leaf on the other side of the stem curling back towards us, but we're not seeing much of it. It's important that you get these little creases in the right direction. That also helps show how the leaf is curling in. So this takes a little bit of time and a little bit of slow observation, and if you've got the photograph, you can blow it up on the screen and really get to understand the anatomy of the plant. So I'm just doing that one there. You can see I've given it a nice little curl. Might just darken it slightly there, just to show that midrib, just getting a little bit deeper as it curls under. And if you feel like this is the wrong colour, then swap to any of the other colours. If you feel it needs to be more minty, keep your other colours mobile. And the other thing as well, with the rust colour, that can be used as well as it curls under here, because they get very hairy, and actually the little hairs sit in between the leaf sections and they look very sort of warm and rusty. So you can use that to define the spaces in between. So mix and match on your colours. And if you feel something's too defined, just tap it very lightly with your brush to soften it. That's the beauty of watercolour, isn't it? Watercolour, not watercolour. Watercolour doesn't sound nice at all. So I'm going to carry on and get some definition on all of these, and then we'll come back and deal with this, because this area really is all defined by the little hairs. So you can see I've put some nice little dark lines here, really just to define how these leaves are curling round, and you're working around the negative shapes and mapping in a little bit of darkness behind them. So that's sort of like the basic start of it. Now I'm going to downsize and add some extra bits of texture and colour, but I'm going to use my fine liner, and I'm going to use some of the lovely minty colour. And what we're going to do is just very gently tap through just to get, they're so small and so tiny and curled under that I'm just going to sort of suggest how the leaves are sort of getting fluffier and curling under. So I'm just tapping the brush acrosswise just to show that there's some changes in colour across the leaves as they curl under. A little bit impressionistic at this stage, but also what this does is it pushes certain areas of the leaf into shadow. So I'm just using a small amount of that minty blue, and I'll just put on some tiny little bits of fluff and detail here and there. Just tapping it on really lightly, and if you see any areas that need to go darker or you need to add some more definition, then return back to the darker colour. So I'm just going to very lightly curl through there and then just tap in the opposite direction just to get them to curl under a little bit more. Tiny little dabs just to show they're very, very fluffy. So work on those and jump around, going from leaf curl to leaf curl, and on the other side we can do the same. I'm going to use the lighter green here because they're a little bit fresher, and I'm going to just very gently tap on a little bit of texture. These are so tiny, they've just curled right the way under, and they're so juvenile that you can't see any real definition on them yet. But I'm just running a little bit of a line through the middle just to show the midrib, and then tapping a bit more colour as they curl under. And I'll do this a few times on these, so just building those little layers up very slowly so that we end up with a really gradual growth of the colour on those. Off we go. So again, if you feel like you need to use some of the gingery colour, then do. Just make sure that you're using the colour that you see. So the next thing we're going to do is add some really nice darks, which is silly saying it like that, but we're going to add some really nice dark corners in there just so we get that really strong contrast. And I'm just going to use a bit of my cup green, which is just dark green ready mixed up, and I'm going to add to that some indigo just to make it super dark, and also I'm going to ruin my red by getting a big blop of that in there as well, so we get that really lovely dark rich green. I'm going to go back to my number 2 brush, and just sort of stand back a little bit from my painting and sort of half look through my eyelashes and see where those darks need to go. And we'll just put them on in small amounts and then just soften them in. So if I start here, I want to go really dark in here, the area that I'd already painted, but I just want to get that really sitting right in there, some nice deep shadow, just to show that it's all curling in and tucking in around there. So I put a little bit of my dark on, quickly clean my brush, and then just very, very gently tap next to the edge of that just to soften it in so we get that lovely, strong, soft shadow down there. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to work along and put in all those little soft shadows, but they're really, really intensely dark, and maybe add in another little bit of cast shadow in here before we come back and put on our final little details. So keep your colour nice and deep and thick if you like, but just put small amounts on and soften as you go. And don't be afraid to put an area really into shadow. So if you see it in shadow, put a little bit of strong colour on and soften it over its surrounding parts. And you'll find that that really strong contrast really gives your little study some real 3-dimension. So we're on the home straight now. The last thing to do is to start putting on all those little bits of rusty hairs, and that will really start to make it look like the bracken that it is. So I'm going to go back to my fine liner. I'm going to use my mixing brush just to wake up my rusty colour, because I haven't used it for a while, so it's just been sitting there. Really important to keep that mobile. I'm just going to beef it up a little bit more, because we've been using some and exhausted it a little bit. There we go. And we're going to start across here and just put the little hairs on as light as you can. Now with your fine liner or your pointed brush, it's very important that you watch that the ferrule, which is the metal part of the brush, doesn't have any blobs of water on it, because they can drop down onto your paper just as you're putting all your fine work on. The other thing is you can have, or I meant to say, you can have a darker puddle, and I would darken it with dark Sazine purple. So I'm going to just use some dark Sazine purple with some Sennelier yellow and a little bit of Rose Madder just to pink it up a little bit. And that's quite nice for the really dark hairs that you see. Now when you're putting the hairs on, roll the brush in the paint and just tap it very lightly on the dab pad, so just the tip of the brush is is dabbed on there, and that takes the little blob at the end of your brush away so that you can get a really nice fine line. And what I tend to do is for the area where I'm coming back into the, for the area where the hairs are going over the top of the stem, I'm going to pull it back towards it so that, I've got no paint on the brush now, so that when the brush stops, it creates a little dot, and the dot is on the plant rather than at the end of the hair. So as I pull it back, you get a little dot. Pull back, like so. And I usually move my brush around to get the different angles, because the hairs won't all be like little soldiers all standing up. Some will be a little bit squished. So I get a nice little bit of variation along the top, and then when I get my brush delivering just the right amount of paint, then I start to speed up and fill in on the other areas. It's quite a good idea to have a little piece of paper that you can just try your hairs out on first, so you can just get the brush delivering the right sort of line, because when you first pick up the paint on any brush, you can find that your line is too thick because there's too much paint being delivered. So wear it out on a small piece of paper first, and then when you know you're going to get the right sort of line, you can then go on to your painting. So this takes a little bit of time, and I want you to think about sort of creating some nice little curls that will come out, and nice little hairs rather, that will come out and show the fluffiness of the whole area. And also they are sitting nicely on these little turned back leaves as well, so you can add some tiny little ones to those. And obviously some of the hairs will be coming towards you, so you can have some little dots of the foreshortened hairs. Right, off we go. So we're going to work very methodically across the artwork, and then hopefully when we've done that, we'll be finished and we can move on to the next design process. So I'm just putting the very last few hairs down the stem, and I'm going to leave this little study just there. So I think it's really nice because we've become familiar with the plant, we've seen how it curls and how the leaves are working, and we've also got an idea of the form and the sort of depth of the plant. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take the drawing and we're going to move it into a pen and ink design. So we're moving on to the next bit of this project, and what I'm doing here is I'm doing a little bit of a change in the shape of the bracken, and I want to put it together to create a nice design of 2 brackens back to back. And what I've done is the sort of classic design tool of reversing the drawing. So what I've done here is I've taken my tracing of the plant itself, and I've put it this way, and then what I've done is I've lowered it, reversed it, and put it down that way. And then what I've done is I've retraced this part of the bracken, and I've changed the angle. So what I've done is I've traced it, and then what I've done is I've moved it round. So if you imagine, we've traced that bit at this angle, and then we've curled it round so that it's just a little bit more curled, and added it on. So the thing that you need to think about is the curve of the stem. So make sure that it curves and stays in line with that original stem, because this bit is quite nice. We don't want to change that. And I've left the top part for the pen and ink just exactly as it is, with the lovely curl there, and then the slightly lower, bigger curl down here. So the way I've put it onto the paper is I've used my original tracing to trace onto, or trace back onto the paper, that first part of the drawing. Then I've drawn the extra piece, changed the angle, and then added it on afterwards. And then what I've done is trace the whole thing off and turn it on the reverse. But what you need when you're working from something like that is the reverse of the actual plant itself. So I've printed it off bigger and reversed it so that I can see the detail for putting in my drawing on that side. So you start off with a very simple drawing on your tracing paper, and you move it around until you get the actual position that you like. And I quite like, if I just talk to you about it, I quite like this angle coming down through. So we have this, the repeat of this scroll, if you like, over here, and then you've got the repeat of the heart, but one behind the other, which is quite nice. The other thing that I'm adapting is that these bracken, when they grow, they're very tall, they're very straight, but very occasionally when you get a clump of them together, you can see that they've slightly curved. So it's not unusual to have a curved stem on the bracken, but it's a very gentle, very gradual curve. I got out my dad's old tools. Now this is a drawing curve. You can still buy these today. They're called a French curve. And they're very useful if you've got a wobbly hand and you want to do a nice, lovely curve on your drawing, but you don't have that steadiness of hand. I used to love them as a child, and I'd look at them and think, what on earth would you use them for? Dad never actually told us what he used them for, but he would bring them home and we would play with them, just drawing around them and turning them into sea monsters and what have you. So that was fun doing that. So I'm using where's my pencil there? I'm going to use my 2H, but I like this one, this Faber-Castell one, because it's a little bit softer than a lot of 2Hs. And then what I do is I draw my drawing up as I did before, just sort of stopping about here. So just below the fronds. And then what I do is I find the straightest and best angle. So find a nice straight bit, because there's part of the French curve that's straighter than other bits. So you move it up and down until you find the angle that you're looking for. And then you very gently use it like you would do a ruler, and that gives you a very lovely gentle curve. And then all I do is freehand come down the other side to give the width of the stem that I want. And the reason that I've done that is we create then an inner loss-in shape, this lovely sort of eye between the two plants. It's a very gentle, long, slim connection between the two images, and it creates a really nice shape. And you might find that this design inspires you for something else. You might have another hobby, maybe carving wood or something like that, and you can simplify this to create a really beautiful design for a piece of carved work, or you might decide that this is a really nice design to have in the front of a letterhead or something like that. So the inspiration, once you start playing with the shapes, can lead on to all other kinds of pursuits and designs. So that's the French curve, and I very often, when I'm making up a sheet, I'll make sure that my main stem runs parallel to the edge of the paper. So I try and make sure that this main stem stays very straight on the page. That's if I'm keeping it as a study page. Because the other thing is, having different styles of painting or drawing on the one page can actually really be a beautiful piece at the end of the day. So it might be that you fill this with other little studies of Bracken, and it becomes a really beautiful piece on its own. So think about placing. If you just put it slightly off and it's not quite parallel with the edge, it can look like it's just been plonked there, and it doesn't have that beauty. So the next tool that I'm going to talk to you about is a drawing pen. Now obviously, once you've put pen to paper, and this is your watercolour paper, once you've put that pen on there, it's permanent. So there's not much room for error. So if you want to do this, it might be worth having a little bit of practice with it. And the style of drawing that I'm doing is an outline with some little hairs and details added. It's not a pointillism drawing, which we do have quite a lot of those very lovely illustrations done for plates and botanical papers, where the illustration is laid out in tiny little dots. It's not that style, but it's something, it's a hybrid between. So it's a drawing that I'm doing in pen, basically. That's what it is. So I'm going to draw this up with this pen, and this is a Micron 01. They come in all sizes, and you just find the one that you like working with. They do come much finer, and they also come a bit thicker, and I've got a full set of them that I keep in a jar. I like these. I quite like sketching with them as well, but obviously when you're sketching you do make quite a lot of mistakes, or I do anyway, so you have to live with the mistakes, which is it's refreshingly different, let's put it that way. So first of all, I've already started with my drawing up here, and you can see that I've outlined and put it in the midribs, and then I've added some little hairs. So that's the style of drawing that I'm going there. And in the areas where it's really dark, I've just slightly dotted and built up the darkness by the density of dots that I'm putting on there. So it's a little bit of that pointillism going on there. So the tips that I can give you for drawing with this pen is to make sure that you haven't had too much coffee, which is really important. Make sure that your drawing is drawn up to the point where you can refer well to it and you don't have to keep making alterations. So be happy with the marks that you've made. And keep stopping and looking back and making sure that you're not making one area much darker or more intricate than another area, because this style of drawing lends itself to being very evenly laid out. So it's a bit like painting with the point of your brush. You keep your pen high up. I sometimes put the lids on the end, but I find that it makes them a bit heavy, so I tend to leave the lids off when I'm working. And if I need a little break, take a little break. So it's really important not to continue through a wobbly, stressful phase. So I do it in little bursts of creativity, and then sit back and have a little look at it and check that it's looking okay. And then when we come to do the long lines, we'll turn it on its side, because it's so much easier to do a straight line when you're moving your hand from left to right or right to left than it is to bring the pen down towards you. But for the moment, I'm just going to map in the rest of my little fronds up here. And actually I did make some notes. I was thinking, I haven't really told you much about Bracken. And one of the things that I Googled when I first discovered these plants, which sounds silly that I didn't discover them, but when I first started looking into them, was the shape of this, or the way they curl round, the way the leaves unfurl. That's commonly called fiddle heads. And if you think about a stringed instrument, the top of a violin or a similar instrument, they have that lovely curled scroll at the top, and I think they call it, what do they call it? I wrote it down here somewhere. Yeah, it is called the scroll, and so that's quite nice. That shape in itself has influenced musical instrument makers through the ages. It is really beautiful, isn't it? There's something really graceful about that beautiful curve. So one of the lovely mythical things that they say about the bracken is that it can give you a perpetual youth, which is an interesting thought, isn't it? But then when I read further on about them, you can actually eat the fiddleheads, although it's not recommended because there is a carcinogen in the fiddlehead, which when it's cooked obviously reduces its carcinogenic properties, but they are eaten in Japan, and I think North America they do eat them, but it's got to be cooked properly, and the water changed regularly, and it depends how risky you want it to be, because I think it can cause quite severe illness, so best avoided, and it can be quite poisonous to animals as well and infect their milk. So I think in a way I think I'll just enjoy them as beautiful things. But one of the other myths as well is if you hold, when they open out and into leaves, you can see on the back they have these little chestnut coloured spores, and it's said that if you hold them it gives you the property of becoming invisible, which sounds rather exciting, so I might try that this summer. Apparently they refer to that in the Shakespeare play Henry V, I think. Anyway, enough about the history, let's get on to drawing. So remember to stay really calm, keep your pen quite upright, and if you're not sure about where you're putting your marks, just refer back to the plant itself and redraw it, maybe with a nice sharp pencil, and then go over those sharp lines. Don't make it up, otherwise you won't be able to put it right. Off we go. I'm just having a little rest from my pen now, and I'll put the lid back on. It's really important to remember that. And I'm going to remove the pencil that I didn't use. So make sure that your pen is dry. It's this, you know, sometimes you can smudge it if you go in with the eraser too quickly. And it's really nice. Once you've got rid of that pencil, it does feel like it can stand up on its own. And what I did was I did just a hint of the hairs along the stem and just kept it very simple. I just put a couple more on the inside stem, but I wanted to talk to you about how maybe you can sort of contain an area of design within another shape. And something that I quite like using, you may have seen on other tutorials where I put like a square behind something or some writing with something. It's quite nice to do that. So I'm just going to show you how I would do that for this little design, and I'm going to use my set square. Set square is really good because you get to get really nice corners and everything's as it should be, because my frame always says to me, he says, Billy, your signature's always wonky, and you know, I can never get the painting just level enough, so I'm really sorry. So I try and think ahead now and try and get everything square. So what I want to do is I want to put like a shape behind this, but have it contained within the shape but not within the shape. So I'm going to put my rectangle behind the design at the top and have the design fall within it at the bottom. And this is just something just to sort of explain what I do sometimes when I'm making a design. Or what I'm doing here now is I'm just going to measure out where I want the box to come. So I'm just going to measure to there, put a little line, and I'm just lining up with the decal edge of the ruler there, just so I get it level. And then I'm going to put my set square just there, so it's just below the heart, and just allowing that part of the design to fall outside. I'll put a nice little line across there. You might be saying to me, Billy, why are you doing this? But this week's project is really just thinking about how you can take a botanical subject and convert it into something more decorative. And that's what I'm looking at here. And I'm putting it onto a page where we'll have lots of decorative versions. Just thinking how I can do this and not make a mess of it. So I'm going to use my set square this way. Just lean over and have a little look. Bring that down. And I want to bring it down to where I stopped the stem. Then I'm going to use it that way to get it level at the bottom. Just put a little line there. This is where I take the design into the shape, and then I'm going to go up and leave a little bit of the design outside at the top again. What's quite nice about this is you can use it for, you know, the beginning of a page of writing maybe, or something like that, like in a manuscript. Or you can just make it into a design as a preliminary sketch for an idea for a painting. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to put that in pen. So I'm going to continue my stem for this one down to the bottom here. I'm going to give it a bit of a stronger line now that we know that's where we're going. Going to continue with some of my dotted line to show the crease in the stem and some of my little dots. Obviously you can put more detail on here as and when you've got your design sorted. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put some little dots to shade that going behind that stem. I'm much braver when I've got my lines sorted Actually sort of just drawing them over the pencil lines is a bit nerve-wracking, but once I've got it sorted, I'm always a little bit braver. So once you've got that sorted, you can finish off by putting on the little hairs down the stem, and then what I'm going to do is put my rectangle in pen. Now, one of the things that I wanted to do was to say, if you're using a ruler and you're putting a pen down, make sure that your pen isn't pushing up against the ruler itself, because what can happen is when you lift the ruler away or slide it away, you can sometimes smudge the line across, especially if it's a very juicy pen, and that's really upsetting when that happens. Just gone over my edge there, so I'm going to just make sure that reads in front. It's always good to make one mistake, and then usually what I do is roll, sort of rub along that edge when I've done that with the pen, just to make sure that there's nothing that's come onto the ruler and then goes onto my page. Nothing worse than when you get to the end of a design that maybe you've done commercially and then you make a mistake and you literally have to start again. So I'm going to come across the top there. Oh, missed a bit. It's quite nice when a geometric shape goes behind a lovely organic pattern. There's something really satisfying about that. I quite like it. And of course, the shape that you put around it or behind it or alongside it doesn't have to be just a box. You can do all kinds of beautiful designs. So there's a book that my husband and I used to use quite a lot when we were working on murals, and it would have lots of decorative ideas through history, sort of ideas of scrolls and patterns of flowers and boxes and all kinds of decorative aids that are used for sort of trompe l'oeil and that sort of thing. And we used to really love looking through that to get ideas when we were adding bits of decorative painting to a wall. Just going to put my little crossbar through here, and that's my pen and ink design worked out. And all I need to do now is maybe just finish and put a little bit more detail on the stems, and if I wanted to make that into a thing, I could even colour in the background. I'm thinking red would be really nice, just to put a sort of red background to that. So I'm going to leave that little design there. I'm going to remove my pencil, and once my pencil's gone, I'm going to go over to my next little design tip that I'm going to share with you, where we work with pencil and wash. So for my next little design element that we're going to talk about, I've taken it one step further. So what I've done in my tracings is I've taken the shape of the left-hand side and I've repeated that shape on the right hand side. So what I've done is I've evened it up and made it into more of a heart shape. So taking that design license just that little bit further. But of course, because the top of the fern is tripinnate, so there are always 3 little branches, we have to keep the 3rd branch in. So I've just kept it as we did up here, where we've kept it curled in, just curled it in just a little bit more. Now here what I'm going to do is I'm going to think about light and shade, and I want to make it look more like a sketch if you were doing a sketch for a carving or something like that, to really make it 3-dimensional. So I'm going to simplify the shapes, and I mean they've not been really sort of looked at and curled out and analysed yet anyway, but what I'm saying for this particular design technique, I'm going to simplify it even more. So what I've done here is I've already started sketching it in. So what's really important is to get a really lovely curve for that heart shape, and I'm going to remove these bumps that were there from before, so just put a little line through those, and that's just for the other side, showing the other side of the curve, and then repeat this lovely strong curve on this side. I'm using a 2B Faber-Castell here for that, so I get a really nice strong line. And I'm going to slightly mimic the bump, but just take it down a little way, so it's not too organised, a little bit more natural. That little notch there. So what I've done is I've taken my tracing and I've put it out here already, sort of lightly, and now all I'm going to do is just reinforce some of those really nice elements of the plant that I like. Now what I'm going to do here is use my eraser pencil. So if there's something that I want to remove, like I want to remove those bumps at the top, I can remove them quite nicely. If I make a mark that I don't want, I'm just going to irritate it away. So it's all about perfecting the shapes at this stage. Rather than being totally true to the plant, we're going to create the shapes that we like. So I'm going to make more of the midrib for each little frond, and then I'm going to sort of slightly simplify the shape in between them, so you get this idea that they are leaves curling in between each other. Like so. And then where it comes round here, I'm going to give a very simple line for the midrib as it curls up and round. Maybe just give that a little bit more plumpness through there. I'm going to remove that little bump there and have it really nice and smooth, so it's just curling round for that lovely fiddle head. Now on the other side I'm going to add a little bit of extra something there, and then I'm going to do the same, just make my midribs like a very long thin triangle, have it curling over, and then a nice simple curve around. So I'm making it a much clearer, easier shape to see. I'm giving it more of a simple design element. So we'll do that, make it really nice and clear. I've kept this curve really lovely and special there, and I might just remove this extra one round here just to make it even simpler. And then I'll come back to you and we'll talk about how we colour that in. So I've got my design finished there, and now what I'm going to do is put a lovely pattern behind it, and I'm going to use my lovely French curve again to get a really nice heart shape. And what I'm going to do is use it like so. So I've got this little one which is very cute, and I'm going to pretend that one doesn't exist, but I'm going to put this design behind, so it's like they're layered up on the page, which I quite like to do for a nice what do you call it, study page. So this is our design study page, and what I'm doing is I'm lining up this French curve with the center of my design, and then I'm taking it down to the middle of the stem there. So I'm just going to run up to that line and then down to the center like so, and I'm just going to straighten that out a little bit, remove it now, and I'm going to use my French curve the opposite way. Well, that does your head in. And just take it from there to create a nice point to my heart shape. Sorry, I'm talking and not talking at the same time. It's a bit confusing. I'm just going to smooth that line between. So then what I do, rather than trying to repeat that shape freehand, is I then trace that bottom shape and the top curve. Give it a little bit of graphite on that side, and then use a little bit of kitchen towel just to smooth the graphite in so you don't get graphite everywhere. And then what I do is I swap it over so I can get exactly the right shape here. And then I use my little French curve again. Now we need to get it the right way round. And then once you've worked out which way your French curve goes, you can then line it up and join it up, and then make a nice clean line. So I use my little erasing pencil to perfect that. And now you don't have to do a heart shape. I realise it is a little bit of an obsession with mine, but I can't stop myself. So I quite like that shape. You know, you can play around with different shapes and what have you, but what I want to do now is I want to just do a little bit of painting. So I'm going to mix up a mid-tone. Now I have a little pot over here which I've mixed up with the 3 primaries: French ultramarine, Sennelier yellow and Sennelier red. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little bit of water and wake that up. And this is what I call my mid-tone colour. If I just stir that under the camera for you, you have to be careful because sometimes I can splash. And then I'm going to put a little bit of that into the middle of my palette. I'm going to use my dirty water to stir and water that down. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some quinacridone gold to this to give it a lovely sort of a stony colour. I want it to look a bit like an old print, you know, when it goes foxing and you get that lovely sepia tone. That's the colour I'm looking for, and I want to water that all the way down. And then I'm going to have a really nice strong version of that just up in the corner. Just take a little bit more of that, and that'll be for my shadows. Whoops. Now I'm going to use a size 2 brush, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to just paint it very sweetly, just with a little glaze, and adding my colour very gently. So start off just with a little bit of water. And just like we did with the green, I'm going to take the water into the little fronds and just put a very pale glaze of that colour, just to give it a colour, a stone colour. So no shading at this point, just a little bit of water and a very soft, gentle tone to it. And I'm starting at the top there like that, and then continuing around the design. So just continue ahead with water, and then pick up a little bit watered, a little bit of the colour watered down. So first of all, it's just going to go on nice and light like that, and then we'll allow it to dry and then come back. Off we go. While that's drying, I'm going to add another little design element to it. So I'm going to put a little box around it. You have to be really careful that we don't disturb anything while we're fiddling around it, but I just fancy putting it into another box. I'm going to do that. I'm just drawing very, very lightly because it's just a sort of sudden thought that I quite like the idea of. I might bring that down as well so that it's half in a box and half out. Continue the theme, as it were. Yes, I quite like that, and I'm going to just put that in a slightly stronger pencil. Do you know what? I'm going to make that shorter as well. Yeah, I'm going to come in a little bit. And if I just mark roughly the width there, then we know how far to take it out the other side. My dad would call that a Bill measurement, where you're just guesstimating. His name was Bill. It's a bit like running across the room saying it's this far, and then by the time you get to the other side it's that far. But it's whatever comes to hand. I quite like the idea of having a little box behind it. I don't know why, it just suddenly came to me, so I thought I'll share it with you. So what I'm going to do now is just remove that original thought there. And this gives my nice initial stone colour a chance to dry. And I'm going to paint the square behind it in the grey colour as well. So I'm going to make it really watery and just paint in the corners. When you do something like this and you're colouring in, make sure you bring the colour with you. So don't go round the shape and fill it in. Bring the colour along with you, and that way you'll get a nice flat wash. If I just show you down here, so you'd start up in this corner here, get a nice neat corner, and as you come further down, bring the colour across and wide, like so. Don't go over the edge. And that way you're always bringing the leading wet edge down the page, and it should leave a nice smooth glaze behind there, because you're not going back and stirring it up and stroking it. You're bringing it downhill. And when you get to the bottom, this is the tricky bit. If it widens into a bigger area, you then have to catch the whole wet edge and bring it down to a nice finished edge. That's the tricky bit at the end. I'm going to put this underneath here to show it's overlapping. You can put your designs anywhere on your page. You can have them separated out onto 3 different bits of paper. You don't have to do it like this. I'm being very frugal. It's one of those things where when you're just practicing and trying out techniques, I just like to use all the paper and get the most out of it. So right, that's going to dry, and it shouldn't get in the way too much. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to mix up my colour just a little bit darker, so not water it down so much. I'm going to have another brush on the go, a size 4, and I'm going to use that as my softening brush. So I'm going to put a little bit of the colour, not so much diluted, into the shadier areas. And you can use it as well to put it under here to get a nice bit of dimension on our stem. So I'm going to put it on the dark side here. I've decided that's the dark side. And then I'm going to use one of my watercolour techniques and soften that on the outside like so. So we get a nice dimensional feel to that stem there. So a little bit of colour. Let's put it on this stem here. So I'm going to go underneath the fronds, just like we did with the green really, down to there. My damp brush and just soften underneath that so we get a bit of light and shade. Just sweep what's left over on the brush down the middle. And for the little fronds, obviously they're curling away from the light, so I'm going to make the bottom part of them just that colour like so, and then soften them towards the top. So each one will get a little shadow at the bottom and then softening towards the top, so we get a nice little feel of them curling over. This is our little stonemason design. As we get round the corner, the light's changing, so the light's going underneath and not on top of the, not at the bottom, but it's going at the top of the curves. So we're going to go underneath and soften. When I worked as a muralist back at the beginning of my career, so after I'd been in fashion, which I didn't enjoy, I went to work as a muralist. And this was one of the things that we would do. Sometimes it's called graisseur. It's like making something look like it was carved out of stone. Love doing that. It's something that we used quite a lot back in the 90s. Sort of was one of those things that was fashionable in interior design. We had some lovely jobs, really nice jobs, and it was really good fun. But I remember doing this particular design on a door, and the electrician was standing behind me, because you know you're always working where there's other skills being done to the house, you know, plumbing, electrician, and we so I was standing there painting, and the guy behind me said, "So that's it." He said, "That's the secret." And I went, "Oh, what?" And he says, "It's all in the shadows." And I said, "Yeah, it is actually. You know, this is what it's all about. If you want something to look three-dimensional, you have to look at the shadows." So as I'm moving around here, I'm now putting a little bit of shade so that the fronds are tucking into one another. So we've gone right away from the natural plant now, and we're trying to think of how we make this look like a solid shape. So I'm going to just soften and put a little bit of shadow where these little leaves would come forward and the underneath would be in shade. So we're going to do that all the way around and make it look as three-dimensional as we can with that first bit of colour, and then I'll come back to you and show you the next bit of colour that we put on. Right, so now I've got that all of that detail mapped in, or shade, darken shade. I'm going to go over to my much darker colour, and now I'm going to come back and put in those really nice dark niches of colour. So I'm going to put in a little bit more for the midribs, because they're important for the shape. So I'm going to go a little bit darker on just one side, like so, and then use my number 4 just to soften, so you get a nice little groove right in the middle of each frond. That's where you chisel deep, and then I'm going to put a little bit of darkness just between each frond, just so that they get defined a little bit more. A little bit more shade in there. and then really dark where it's all colliding in here. It's nice, it looks really curly, doesn't it? I love this bit when you start to sort of pull it together. And of course, once you've done this, you can remove the pencil, which is quite nice because then the thing stands out on its own. So I'm just going to put these nice little tiny bits of really dark stone colour and one or two little chisel lines, I guess we'll call them. And where we need to soften, we'll soften. And the other thing you need to do is think about if the light was hitting it, what would be in shadow. So you can just add another little bit of maybe slightly watered down stone colour and just put that little area there all into shade because that's tucked behind. And then when you get back to that, you can put some detail into it once it's dry. Off we go, nice little bits of dark detail. Just adding the last little bit of shadow around here just to get this lovely curve. And then we'll stop and have a little look at what we've done. So I'm not going to tidy this up just at the moment. I'm going to let that settle and dry. But once that's dry, you can have a little look and maybe get rid of the pencil and see if there's anything that needs to go darker. But I quite like doing this. This is very me when I'm in my play mood in the studio, just trying to enjoy and see what I can turn my botanical studies into design-wise. And so I really hope that you find this interesting. It's something that's really fun to do and really pushes how you look at plants and how plants have influenced design through the ages as well. So it sort of gives you an idea of how a lot of those stone architecture ideas were derived from or inspired by natural forms. So I think this is a really nice study page. So you can add other things to it. You can add more studies of the bracken and try the different techniques, the different pen and ink and maybe doing a little pencil and wash. Hope you have a little bit of time put aside just to take yourself away from just the botanical study and into a little bit of a taste of design. Hope you enjoy it.